He never expected that a trip to the mall would ignite a lifetime of memories and regrets, but as he stepped into the late afternoon sun, coffee steaming gently in one hand and his car keys jingling in the other, he froze, breath catching as his eyes fell upon a figure curled in tatters by the bricked curb near the entrance. The girl looked up from her calloused palm, eyes hollow yet something in the way her gaze sharpened for a moment, scanning his face with a mix of disbelief and recognition, slammed into him like a tidal wave, sweeping away the calm he'd cultivated in the 12 years since she vanished without a word. His chest squeezed with sudden pain, heart fluttering like a trapped bird beating against his ribs, and for a moment the world around them, the passing shoppers, the rumble of distant traffic, the scent of pretzels and perfume drifting from inside, faded into a blur as memories cascaded through his mind. The thrill of stolen glances in hallways lined with lockers, their laughter as they shared a milkshake under the old oak tree in autumn's golden haze, the soft promise of forever whispered behind closed doors. She had been his first everything, the spark that illuminated his youth, and when she left it felt like the lights went out inside him, leaving rooms of his soul dark and empty and echoing with questions he had no answers for. His jaw clenched as guilty anger rose to his cheeks, fueled by the rumors he had been fed, that she had gone off with another boy, that she had turned her back on him and everyone who loved her. But the hollow ache behind his eyes whispered of a different truth, one he was only beginning to fathom now as he drew closer, boots crunching on gravel, senses alert to every ragged breath she took and the way her thin body shivered despite the mid-spring warmth. She was the same girl, yet different, skin pallid and marked by hardship, hair knotted into matted tendrils, the softness around her jawline replaced by hollows that spoke of hunger and sleepless nights. His voice trembled when he spoke her name, Melissa, a whisper that felt like a trespass against the silence that had bound them apart. She blinked up at him, confusion contorting her delicate features before recognition flared in her eyes and tears shone like broken glass. She stood, wobbly as a newborn fawn, and the small tin can in her hand fell to the ground with a hollow clang before she pressed her palms together as if in apology. "Ryan," she murmured, voice ragged, and in that single word he heard every unspoken truth, every lonely night he'd spent wondering why she'd disappeared, and every morning he'd woken to absence where her laughter used to be. Behind the anger and sorrow lay a deeper current of love long buried, and now it surged toward him like a flood that threatened to sweep him away. He wanted to scream at her for leaving, for breaking his heart, but the sight of her, fragile, wounded, and haunted by memories she refused to share, knotted his tongue. Instead he asked the question that had driven him to the brink all those years, "Why did you leave me?" Her eyes flickered down, tears tracing dirty tracks along her cheeks as she swallowed hard, turning away to catch the gaze of strangers who glanced her way with a mixture of pity and shame. "I didn't want you to see me like this," she said hoarsely, voice barely louder than the rustle of wind through the glass doors behind them. "I thought if I stayed, I'd break you, too." His heart lurched at her words, a stab of guilt piercing him as he remembered the last thing she'd said to him. Nothing, just a ghost of a smile before she disappeared into a night he'd spent searching for her, phone cupped to his ear dialing and redialing, only to hear that haunting recording. No answer. Her secret, hidden beneath layers of pride and fear, came pouring out as she told him about that night in their hometown, the collision of tragedy that stole her younger brother, Joey, the weight of blame she carried as the one supposed to watch over him, and how her mother's grief drove her away. She had thought running meant survival, had believed that if she could erase herself from his life, she might ease her own guilt. But the running brought her only farther from the light, into a world of empty storefronts and back alley shadows where she begged for coins alongside others who wore their pain like ragged coats. As she spoke, her voice cracked with fury and sorrow both, and he felt the raw edges of her shame cut him open, awakening compassion he hadn't known remained in him. He reached out and brushed a trembling strand of hair from her forehead, sweat and dirt mingling on her temples, and she flinched at the contact, bracing for rejection. Instead, he took her hand, the fingers slender and roughened by hardship, and folded it gently in his own, warmth spreading through him in a way that made his entire body ache with hope. Without a word, he turned toward the parking lot and fished a crumpled business card from his jeans pocket, pressing it into her palm with all the tenderness he could muster. "Come with me," he said, voice soft but resolute. "You're not alone anymore." She hesitated, eyes brimming with tears as though afraid to believe this moment could be real after so many years of darkness, but at last she nodded, a flicker of trust sparking in her gaze, and followed him across the asphalt. They drove in silence for a stretch of time that felt like an eternity, the click of turn signals and hum of tires on pavement underscoring the quiet healing beginning between them. When they arrived, he led her into his modest apartment, walls adorned with framed photos of family gatherings and long-forgotten road trips, and guided her to the couch where a blanket awaited. He filled 2 mugs with hot tea and sat beside her, handing one over. As she cradled the warm cup, her hands steadied, and he traced the steam spiral as though it were a bridge between past and present, the thin line of connection they were rebuilding. Conversation spilled from them in hesitant silences and broken laughter as she told him about her journey through shelters, the short-lived jobs cleaning houses and waiting tables, the nights spent under freeway overpasses to escape winter's freeze. He listened, heart twisting at every hardship she endured alone, and told her what he'd become in her absence. An engineer swirling through spreadsheets and designs, a man who measured life by deadlines and deliverables rather than the beating of his own heart. He confessed his loneliness, the hollow echo of their last goodbye ringing louder than any silence, and she wept at his confession, proud walls crumbling as she realized the depth of the wound she had inflicted. They sat together as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and golds, and he made her promise to start fresh, to seek help, to allow him to be her support, to rediscover the girl he had once known, fierce, compassionate, full of dreams. In the days that followed, he guided her to meet with counselors who helped untangle the guilt that had shackled her spirit, found her a room in a small shared house where she could stand on her own feet, and encouraged her to enroll in a community college course she'd once dreamed of taking. Each sunrise brought small victories. The first time she laughed at something silly on TV, the day she sent him a text from the library saying she'd finished writing a paper, the evening he walked her home after her first shift at a bookstore, pride shining in her eyes as she recounted her customer's quirky requests. He was there to celebrate, to catch her when tears of relief and joy spilled over, and in those moments the emptiness that had settled in his chest began to vanish, replaced by a gentle warmth that whispered of renewal. Love blossomed softly between them again, not as the reckless passion of their teenage years but as a patient flame, tended carefully for the fragile blooms of trust and respect to unfurl. He remembered the promise rings they'd once exchanged and found himself holding her hand with the same mixture of awe and devotion, tracing the lines of her palm as though they formed a map back to the happiness he'd feared lost. Though shadows of the past lingered, echoes of that fateful night, the ache of unfathomable guilt she still carried, they faced them together, offering forgiveness as balm for old wounds. And in giving each other grace, they discovered that second chances weren't mistakes but gifts of hope wrapped in vulnerability and courage. On a quiet evening, months later, they walked the same route past the mall where it all began, hands intertwined beneath a sky speckled with stars. She paused beside the curb where she'd begged, placing a single white rose atop the cracked concrete, a gesture of closure and remembrance for the brokenness she'd known. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder as they stood in the hush of the night, and she whispered, voice steady with conviction, "Thank you for finding me again." He smiled, breath warm against her ear, and replied, "Thank you for letting me." And as they walked away into the soft glow of streetlights, neither spoke of forever but both knew with certainty that they had come home to each other, where grace thrived and love, once lost, had found its way back at last.